Welcome back to the Bull Moose Network, where we cut through the noise and get straight to the stories that actually matter. I'm Brian Vish, and today we've got a packed episode covering the major shifts happening in Michigan and beyond. First, we're going to look at one of the biggest labor victories in recent history. Michigan has officially repealed right to work. What does that mean for workers, businesses, and the future of union power? We'll break it down together. But it's not just labor laws making waves. Consumers Energy is cutting down trees across 8,000 miles of power lines in Michigan to prevent outages. Good idea? Bad idea? Depends on who you ask. We'll get into the numbers, the impact, and why some residents aren't happy about it. And then, the race for Michigan's open Senate seat is already heating up. With Senator Gary Peters stepping down, both parties are up for a fight. We'll talk about who's running, what's at stake, and how this race could flip the balance of power in Washington. After that, we'll shift gears to something that affects millions of people: SSRIs. Are antidepressants being overprescribed? Are pharmaceutical companies pushing pills over real solutions? We dive into the research, the corporate influence, and what it all means for mental health care. Then finally, we'll wrap things up with something a little more personal. I just released my new novel, Defacing the Currency: Life in Late-Stage Capitalism. It's a cynical, darkly funny, and painfully relatable story if you've ever felt trapped in a cycle of meaningless work. I'll tell you what it's about, why I wrote it, and how you can grab a copy. So, buckle up, because we've got a lot to cover. Let's get into it. In Lansing, Michigan, lawmakers have enacted major changes to the state's current labor laws. The headline change: Michigan repealed its decade-old right-to-work law, making it the first state in nearly 60 years to roll back a right-to-work policy. That means in unionized workplaces, employees can once again be required to pay union dues or fees as a condition of employment. This reverses a 2012 law that had allowed workers to opt out of supporting a union while still being covered by union contracts. The repeal covers both private and public sector unions, though a U.S. Supreme Court ruling still stops public employers from requiring fees from government workers. Alongside this, Governor Gretchen Whitmer and the Democratic-led legislature also reinstated Michigan's prevailing wage requirement, guaranteeing union-level pay and benefits on state-funded construction projects. That prevailing wage law, originally enacted in 1965 and repealed in 2018, is now back, meaning government construction jobs must pay wages comparable to union rates. The pro-labor majority in Lansing didn't stop there. They rolled back several restrictions on collective bargaining that were put in place over the past decade. For public employees, wage increases that were negotiated in a contract can now continue even after the contract expires, ending a freeze on pay that unions say employers had used to stall negotiations. In K-12 schools, districts and teacher unions can once again negotiate over topics that had once been off limits, such as which classes teachers teach and how teachers are evaluated. Previously, state law had barred bargaining on certain education issues. Now those decisions can involve more teacher input. Schools can also resume deducting union dues from paychecks to help with union fee collection, a practice that had been banned since 2012. And in higher education, graduate students who are assistants at public universities are now legally considered public employees with the right to unionize. All told, these changes tilt the balance back toward unions, giving them greater say at the bargaining table and making it easier to collect resources and organize members. Labor organizations are celebrating these reforms as a historic victory for workers. Quote, "After decades of anti-worker attacks, Michigan has restored the balance of power for working people," said Ron Bieber, president of the Michigan AFL-CIO, praising the new laws that protect workers' freedom to bargain for good wages, benefits, and safe workplaces. Supporters argue that empowering unions will lift middle class incomes and improve working conditions. Governor Whitmer echoed that sentiment, saying the repeal of right to work will restore workers' rights, protect Michiganders on the job, and grow Michigan's middle class. Union leaders also note that the return of prevailing wage will raise pay for construction workers and help ensure that skilled labor stays in state. Public sector unions, from teachers to transit workers, say removing bargaining restrictions will allow more productive negotiations and help retain employees in those fields. However, Michigan's business community and Republican lawmakers have pushed back, warning of economic fallout. Critics of the new laws argue that forcing union fees on workers and increasing labor costs could drive businesses away. Joseph Lehman of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy slammed the right to work repeal as a massive, unforced error that weakens Michigan's ability to compete globally. The Detroit Regional Chamber cautioned that while practical impact on existing union shops may be small, ending right to work could make Michigan a less attractive destination for new investment, claiming that states with right to work laws have a distinct advantage in luring international business. If Republicans are America first, as they claim, I'm not sure why international business is a concern for them. But hey, what do I know? Republican leaders also blasted the expansion of teacher bargaining rights. Surprise, surprise. House Minority Leader Matt Hall said it gives union bosses power over public schools and warned it might put union priorities above student needs. Business associations like the Michigan Chamber of Commerce voiced extreme disappointment, calling the pro-union legislation short-sighted and saying it comes directly at the expense of workers, employers, and taxpayers. Because paying workers fair wages is somehow bad for workers and taxpayers. You know, the same taxpayers who don't have to cover public assistance when people are actually paid enough to live. Talk about saying the quiet part out loud. They contend that these policies will raise operating costs and could lead to job losses or slower job growth, especially in manufacturing and construction. In response, unions argue that better pay and secure workers actually boost productivity and consumer spending, ultimately helping the economy, a debate that's now unfolding across the state. Michigan workers are also seeing changes in minimum wage and benefits. In a bipartisan compromise last month, Governor Whitmer and lawmakers approved of a plan to raise the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2027, with annual inflation adjustments afterward. The current minimum wage jumped to $12.48 an hour on February 21st and will now gradually climb each year until hitting $15 under the new schedule. Importantly, the deal preserved the tipped wage credit, which many restaurants lobbied to keep, instead of eliminating the lower tipped wage entirely, as an existing law would have done. The cash wage for tipped workers will slowly raise to 50% of the standard minimum by 2031 rather than 100%. Lawmakers also expanded sick leave requirements. Most Michigan businesses will soon have to offer at least 1 week of paid sick time to employees annually. Specifically, companies with more than 10 employees must provide 9 days of paid leave, and smaller businesses at least 5 days. Previously, many employers were exempt or had lower leave requirements under a 2018 law. Small businesses have been given extra time until October to implement the new sick leave rules. These moves came as the legislature raced to amend worker-friendly laws that were set to kick in due to a court ruling. By acting now, they tempered a court-ordered policy that would have raised the minimum wage even faster and mandated more leave, changes that business groups warned could strain employers. The compromise is meant to boost workers' pay and benefits on a quicker timeline than the current law, but with concessions to ease the burden on employers. Reactions to the wage and leave reforms have been mixed. Governor Whitmer hailed the plan as a common sense compromise and thanked Republicans and Democrats for forging a fair bipartisan deal. Some businesses, particularly those in the hospitality industry, expressed relief that the tipped wage will remain in place. A spokesperson for Save Michigan Tips Coalition, which includes restaurant workers worried about losing tips, said servers and bartenders are breathing easier, knowing the tip credit isn't going away, calling the legislative fix a big step toward averting a tip credit crisis. Major employer groups have generally approved of the measured approach to phasing in higher wages, preferring it over an abrupt hike. On the other side, labor advocates who pushed for the 2018 ballot initiative are disappointed. The group One Fair Wage blasted lawmakers for scaling back the broader raises and paid time off that the court had ordered. Quote, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled that these wage increases should be implemented, yet lawmakers are attempting to roll them back before they even take effect, said Saru Jayamar, president of One Fair Wage, who vowed to mobilize voters to reverse the compromise. That sets the stage for a possible referendum as organizers gather signatures to put the $15 wage and tip phase-out issue on the 2026 ballot, letting voters decide the outcome. In summary, Michigan's recent labor law overhaul marks a significant shift in favor of unions and workers after years of more restrictive policies. Union rights and collective bargaining power have been strengthened from the shop floor to the public school classrooms, and many workers stand to gain higher pay and expanded benefits. Supporters say these changes will rebuild the middle class and improve job quality across the state. Meanwhile, business leaders and many Republicans are sounding alarms, arguing that the pendulum swing may hurt Michigan's business climate and lead to unintended consequences for jobs. As these laws take effect, all sides will be watching their impact. For now, Michigan's landscape is entering a new era, with debates over workers' rights versus economic competitiveness continuing to play out in the public square. So, Michigan's labor laws are shifting in favor of workers. Unions are gaining power again, and businesses are scrambling to adjust. But while lawmakers are changing policies on the ground, let's look up, literally, because over at Consumers Energy, they're taking a different approach to keeping Michigan running by cutting down thousands of trees. Is this necessary infrastructure work or just another short-sighted corporate move? Let's talk about it. Consumers Energy is undertaking a major tree clearing initiative across Michigan in 2025 to strengthen the electric grid and reduce power outages. The utility company plans to trim or remove trees along more than 8,000 miles of power lines statewide. The aggressive effort is part of Consumers Energy's Reliability Roadmap, which is about preventing tree-related outages before they happen. Trees and branches hitting power lines are the leading causes of outages, accounting for roughly 40% of all interruptions. By clearing vegetation near lines, the company aims to keep the lights on during storms and improve service reliability for homes and businesses across the state. The tree clearing work will span Consumers Energy's service territory, which covers large portions of Michigan's Lower Peninsula and western communities. Communities in northern and western Michigan are seeing significant activity. For example, Manistee County in northwest Michigan is slated to have over 85 miles of lines cleared in 2025, though that's down from 245 miles in 2024. While neighboring Benzie County will have about 125 miles cleared, up from just 35 miles last year. In the Traverse City area, Consumers Energy has targeted corridors like the Old Mission Peninsula, where hundreds of trees could be removed under this plan. Work is also ongoing in other parts of the state. Essentially, any place where overgrown trees pose a high risk to power lines is a focus. The company says crews are concentrating on high priority areas, spots prone to outages from vegetation, to make the most impact. This initiative represents a significant financial commitment by Consumers Energy. Each mile of power line cleared costs the utility company about $15,000, covering labor, equipment, and debris removal. With 8,000 miles on the schedule for this year, that implies roughly a $120 million investment in 2025 to trim and remove trees statewide. By comparison, Consumers Energy spent about $100 million on tree trimming in 2024 when it cleared 7,000 miles of lines. Company officials frame this spending as crucial infrastructure investment. They consider vegetation management just as important as upgrading poles or wires for improving reliability. The Michigan Public Service Commission, or MPSC, which regulates utilities, has pressured companies to increase these efforts after massive outages in recent years. In fact, following severe storms that left hundreds of thousands without power, state leaders, including Governor Gretchen Whitmer, called on utility companies to invest more in tree trimming and grid hardening to prevent repeat disasters. Consumers Energy's 2025 budget for line clearing is a direct response to that call, aimed at showing they are using funds to tackle one of the root causes of the outages. Despite the reliability goal, the tree clearing push has raised several environmental and community concerns among some residents and experts. Homeowners in affected areas worry that removing trees will dramatically alter the local landscape and the ecosystems. On Traverse City's Old Mission Peninsula, for instance, residents fear the loss of hundreds of trees could transform the look and feel of their properties and neighborhoods. Trees provide shade, they provide beauty, and wildlife habitat, not to mention the clean air. So taking them down en masse feels like a serious trade off to those who live there. Some environmental advocates emphasize the need to balance reliability with conservation. They urge that only truly hazardous limbs be removed and that healthy trees be preserved whenever possible. There are also calls for utility companies to consider burying power lines or other solutions in certain areas to avoid harming mature trees, though such measures can be far more costly and are not part of Consumers Energy's current plan. The company insists it is conducting line clearing in an environmentally responsible manner, working with certified arborists and aiming to promote a healthier remaining tree canopy by removing only what's necessary. Sounds like a lot of corporate speak to me. Consumers Energy's forestry team coordinates with landowners ahead of time, and the utility says it tries to replant or replace trees in some cases to mitigate the environmental impact. Still, the scale of this initiative has left some residents uneasy about potential loss of greenery in their communities. Reactions to the 2025 trimming blitz have been mixed. Many residents support the goal of fewer outages, but are unhappy with how the process affects their property. In areas like Old Mission Peninsula, homeowners have pushed back strongly. They accuse Consumers Energy of aggressive tactics, such as threatening eminent domain lawsuits to obtain new easements for removing trees on private land. A group of neighbors there is even banding together and considering legal action to challenge the extent of the tree removals. Elsewhere, some neighborhood associations and city officials have sought more communication and transparency from the company. Consumers Energy has responded by increasing outreach, holding community meetings, and sending forestry planners door to door to explain the work. Company spokespeople acknowledge that tree trimming has an impact for homeowners, and they say they are willing to adjust plans whenever possible after listening to local concerns. Environmental organizations have also taken note. While no major environmental group has formally opposed the initiative's goals, there is a general sentiment among conservationists that utilities should proceed with caution. Tree advocacy groups stress the importance of urban and rural tree canopies for climate and quality of life. And they encourage practices like trimming instead of just removal and planting new trees to replace those lost. These voices urge long term planning so that power lines and trees can coexist with minimal conflict. For regulators and government officials, the immediate priority is reliability. The MPSC and governor's office, after repeated outages, largely support Consumers Energy's intensified trimming schedule as a necessary step. In fact, the MPSC has put both consumers and DTE Energy on notice that if they don't improve reliability, they could face penalties in the future. This pressure has somewhat tilted the balance in favor of aggressive tree maintenance, despite the complaints. Consumers Energy leadership emphasizes they have an obligation to keep the grid safe. In short, stakeholders are divided. Customers want fewer blackouts, but nobody likes losing trees. The conversation continues as a project moves forward with some compromises and adjustments likely on a case by case basis. Consumers Energy expects this tree clearing initiative to significantly improve power reliability across Michigan. By removing overhanging limbs and trees that could knock down lines, the utility company is proactively preventing outages before they occur. Internal data already show positive results where intensive tree trimming has been done in recent years. Fewer outages and shorter power interruptions have been reported in areas after crews cleared the lines. In fact, the company noted that customers experienced about 21 fewer minutes of outage time on average last year, thanks in part to increased tree trimming maintenance, and over 93% of outages were restored within 24 hours. Those numbers underscore the reliability gains attributed to aggressive vegetation management. Consumers Energy likens the effort to a form of insurance. Tough Michigan weather is less likely to take down power line if they are cleared. Officials also point out that line clearing is one of the most effective steps they can take immediately, compared to long term projects like rebuilding our infrastructure. Residents in some hard hit neighborhoods are already noticing improvements as well. In Grand Rapids, a local trouble spot nicknamed the Bermuda Triangle of frequent outages saw none in the weeks after nearby trees were cut back. So while it's too early to declare victory, the expectation is fewer fallen branches will mean fewer emergency repairs and more resilient grid. Consumers Energy says the tree clearing is being combined with other reliability measures, upgrading equipment and even selectively burying some lines in the worst areas to fortify our system. If successful, this 2025 program could mark a turning point, reducing the kind of extended blackouts Michigan residents endured in recent summers and winters. Utility executives acknowledge Michigan's dense tree cover is part of its natural beauty, but they are betting that a careful, large scale trimming campaign now will spare the state from larger catastrophes when the next ice storm or wind event hits. In summary, the 2025 tree clearing initiative is a proactive gamble to trade some green in order to keep the power on, aiming for a sturdier electric grid with far fewer outages. So, is this necessary infrastructure work or just another short sighted corporate move? Well, if you ask Consumers Energy, it's all about reliability, keeping the power on, preventing outages, and protecting the grid. But if you ask the residents watching their trees lined neighborhoods get clear cut, it feels a lot more like a corporate shortcut. Instead of investing in long term solutions like burying power lines altogether, they're taking the cheap, fast route, chopping everything down and calling it progress. Typical. And speaking of decisions that will shape Michigan's future, let's talk about the race for Michigan's open U.S. Senate seat. Senator Gary Peters is stepping down, and both parties are already sharpening their knives for what could be one of the most competitive races in the country. Who's in? Who's out? And how could this change the balance of power in Washington? Let's get into it. Michigan's next U.S. Senate race is already taking shape. Two-term Democratic Senator Gary Peters says he won't run for re-election in 2026, opening a rare open seat contest in this battleground state. His announcement has set off immediate jockeying among big-name Democrats and Republicans, all eyeing a seat that could prove decisive in the narrowly divided Senate. High-profile candidates are lining up on both sides. Former U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, now a Michigan resident, has ruled out a run for governor. However, he is very seriously focusing on a 2026 Senate bid. State Senator Mallory McMorrow, a rising Democratic star, tells reporters she's taking a serious look at running for Senate as well as governor, and is consulting on where she can do the most good for Michiganders. Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist is also said to be giving the Senate race a hard look, and Congresswoman Haley Stevens is actively considering a campaign. On the Republican side, freshman U.S. Representative John James, who narrowly lost to Peters in 2020, has hinted at another Senate run, posting that brighter days are ahead for Michigan on social media. Another prominent GOP name, former Congressman Mike Rogers, who lost a close Senate contest last year, has also signaled he may try again in 2026. With no incumbents, both parties are expected to have competitive primaries unless a consensus candidate emerges. The stakes are high for control of the Senate. Michigan hasn't elected a Republican senator since 1994, but the GOP sees a golden opportunity with this seat open. Republicans are coming off a narrow miss in 2024. Democrat Alyssa Slotkin won Michigan's other Senate seat by less than half a percentage point. And in 2024, President Donald Trump carried Michigan by about 1.4%. Democrats, meanwhile, note they've held both Michigan Senate seats for over 2 decades and vow to keep this one blue. With the Senate closely divided, a flip of this seat could swing the majority. Analysts at Sabato's Crystal Ball rate the Michigan race as an early toss-up. They point out that if 2026 is a midterm with a Republican in the White House, history would normally favor Democrats in Michigan. However, the state's recent razor-thin outcomes add plenty of uncertainty. Both parties agree Michigan will be one of the nation's marquee Senate battles, critical to the balance of power. Key issues are already coming into focus for the 2026 campaign. Economic themes will loom large, especially jobs and the future of Michigan's auto industry. Republicans accuse Democrats of policies that destroyed auto manufacturing in the state and say voters want change. Democrats are likely to tout new investments in manufacturing and their alignment with labor unions, aiming to keep working class support. Abortion rights are poised to be a defining issue as well. Michigan voters decisively approved a state constitutional amendment protecting abortion in 2022, and Democrats argue GOP contenders hold dangerous anti-abortion records out of step with Michigan's electorate. The state's diversity could put foreign policy on the agenda as well. Michigan has a sizable Arab American and Jewish community, and both parties courted those voters during the 2024 Israel-Gaza genocide. Voter priorities like infrastructure improvements, a signature issue for Buttigieg, education, and public safety, may also shape the debate. With so much on the line from the direction of national policy to core local concerns, Michigan's 2026 Senate race is set to be a hard fought, drawing national attention as voters decide who will fill Senator Peters' shoes. So, the race for Michigan's open Senate seat is shaping up to be a political brawl, with both parties desperate to claim power. And if history tells us anything, it's that the campaign ads will be relentless. The debates will be full of empty promises, and by the time it's over, we'll all be questioning our sanity. Which conveniently brings us to our next topic: SSRIs. Antidepressants are being handed out like candy, but are they actually helping people or just numbing them to the realities of a broken system? Big Pharma says they're life changing, but when nearly 1 in 10 Americans is on an SSRI, maybe the real question isn't why are so many people depressed, but why wouldn't they be? Let's talk about it. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, are one of the most prescribed medications in the US. But recent investigations raise serious questions about their widespread use and the financial motives behind them. A report published by JAMA found that antidepressant prescriptions have nearly quadrupled since the early 90s, with nearly 1 in 10 Americans now on an SSRI. Yet studies show that 80% of these prescriptions are written by non psychiatrists, often in brief consultations where alternative treatments like therapy are never discussed. Why? Because the system prioritizes speed and profit over patient well being. Pharmaceutical companies have played a major role in this surge. A randomized trial found that patients who asked for a brand name antidepressant after seeing a commercial were far more likely to receive a prescription even when their symptoms didn't fully warrant it. Researchers concluded that direct to consumer advertising has a profound effect on prescribing patterns. Investigative journalists have also found that the healthcare system makes it easier to get an SSRI than therapy. Insurance policies favor medication over counseling, and psychiatrists can make 2 to 4 times more money managing prescriptions than providing talk therapy. A financial structure that reinforces the pill for every ill mindset. But is depression always a medical condition? Or is it a deeper symptom of social issues? Researchers from The Lancet argue that economic instability, job insecurity, and housing stress are major drivers of mental illness. Yet these systemic issues are rarely addressed in mainstream treatment. Instead, SSRIs are used to mask distress caused by financial struggles, social isolation, and burnout. And then there's the question of long term risks. Studies show that millions of Americans have been on SSRIs for years, some struggling with withdrawal symptoms when they try to stop. Even more concerning, post SSRI sexual dysfunction, or PSSD, a condition where patients experience permanent sexual dysfunction even after stopping the drug. Despite this, the FDA has yet to issue any warning labels about such a condition. So, what's the solution? Many experts say the real issue isn't SSRIs themselves, it's the system. A healthcare model driven by profit incentivizes overprescription and discourages holistic care. If mental health is tied to economic and social conditions, maybe the best cure isn't a pill, it's systemic change. So, We've got a system that hands out antidepressants like participation trophies because instead of fixing the crushing weight of capitalism, we just medicate people until they can tolerate it. Feeling burned out? Here's a pill. Stressed about money? Here's a pill. Trapped in an endless cycle of meaningless work? Oh, buddy, we've got a whole pharmacy for that. And that brings me to my new novel, Defacing the Currency: Life in Late Stage Capitalism. It's dark, satirical, coming of age story about a guy trying to break free from the grind only to find himself sucked right back in, no matter what path he takes. If that sounds familiar, I think we'll have something else to talk about. All right, let's talk about Defacing the Currency: Life in Late Stage Capitalism. My new novel about a guy who's trying and failing to escape the corporate machine. No matter what path he takes, no matter how hard he resists, he finds himself right back in the same cycle of meaningless work, debt, and existential dread. That sound familiar? This is a story about the illusion of choice, about how the so-called land of opportunity often funnels you into different flavors of the same low-wage, dead-end existence. It's dark, it's cynical, and it's funny in that if you don't laugh, you'll cry kind of way. And yeah, it's personal. This isn't just a critique of capitalism, it's a critique of myself as someone who was raised by it. If you've ever felt like life is just a series of increasingly absurd tasks designed to keep you too busy to question any of it, this book is for you. If you hate your job, if you hate the job you had before that, and if you're pretty sure you'll hate the job you haven't even gotten yet, this book is definitely for you. I wanted to write something that critiques society, but also critiques myself. Because let's be honest, we're all products of this mess, and maybe it's time we stop pretending we've got it all figured out and start questioning why we live this way. If that sounds like something you'd be into, or if you just want to read about someone else's existential crisis for a change, I have a book for you. It's available at my store. It's available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other major retailers. But again, if you would rather support me directly, because unlike Jeff Bezos, I don't have a space program, you can grab it directly through my Ingram Spark link on my website, scan the QR code, or check the link in the description below. Again, Defacing the Currency is out now. Buy it, read it, and then maybe, just maybe, we can start thinking about a better way to live. And that's a wrap for this episode of Bull Moose News. We've covered Michigan's labor law shakeup, the battle over tree cutting in the name of infrastructure, the Senate race that could flip the balance of power, the overprescription of antidepressants, and of course, my new novel. Because if capitalism is going to keep us trapped in an endless loop of pointless work, the least I can do is make fun of it. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe, share, and if you really want to help keep independent journalism alive, consider supporting the Bull Moose Network, either through donating on my website or by purchasing a copy of my book. And if you want to support me directly, grab that copy of my book, Defacing the Currency, through the link in the description or on my website. Until then, eyes open, voices loud.